Welcome everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent, back home after a few days in Portland, and we're going to cover a new outlet we haven't touched on yet in this channel. Today we're talking about law and crime. Now, as we all know, I'm not a lawyer, I just pay attention, but law and crime has made a name for itself by doing a lot of high-profile court TV coverage and commentary. Now, I follow several different lawyers who do this kind of commentary, and not all of them are fans of law and crime. So when I saw this pop up, I expected a little bit of bias towards the left, and I was not disappointed. So this article is about a recent kerfuffle that happened where a former intelligence analyst was recently convicted of the same thing that President Trump has been charged with and sentenced to 4 years in prison. The reason why this is important is really simple. This is an issue that, if understood incorrectly, or if we as a society get it wrong, cuts at the heart of the way the Constitution allocates power in the country. We have a tremendous tension between the designed constitutional republic as contained in our founding documents and the implementation of the federal government as we have today, which seems to rely on a permanent administrative state ruled by a fairly permanent managerial class. The combination of these two concepts creates an unelectable, unaccountable bureaucracy that wields the lion's share of the power in our country and in our government. That takes us to really bad places if that is not addressed. An ex-intelligence analyst for the FBI in Kansas who pleaded guilty to 2 counts of violating the same charged offense former President Donald Trump faces in his Mar-a-Lago federal prosecution was sentenced Wednesday to nearly 4 years in prison. This development in the case of Kendra Kingsbury, 50 years old, is not good news for Trump, particularly if he does not abandon the throw it all at the wall and see if it sticks strategy he deployed since his indictment in Florida. The on-point Kingsbury case shows that the former president faces the real prospect of going to prison if convicted of these Espionage Act charges, and there are 31 of those counts in his case. For a big chunk of the population, this issue is a non-starter. It's not a thing. For other parts, this is a fatal issue and should send President Trump, that terrible criminal, to prison for the rest of his life. So let's try and break down how we get to such a tremendously distorted perspective, diametrically opposed views with the same fact pattern, because no one really disagrees much with the fact pattern. I try really hard to learn how to articulate the case that other people are making, to be able to see it from their perspective. It helps me to understand the case from both sides. An issue from both sides. And so normally I will try and do my best to steelman the other person's argument, similar to when we were talking about unions. But I struggle here. And so, to put briefly, I'm going to lay out why this is a non-starter, and I would love it if someone could lay out for me what I'm missing here. Because this should be nothing other than perhaps proof that we live in a world of selective enforcement of the law, which means we don't have a rule of law, which means that we are effectively a corrupt country and on our way out. So here's why it's a non-starter. The Constitution establishes the executive branch in the person of the president. The President of the United States holds in himself all of the power of the executive branch. The executive branch's job is to, no surprise, is to execute the laws of the country. It is impractical for him to execute and uphold all of the laws for all of the country. He's one person. So we have the executive branch, where we have a lot of delegation of authority, where basically the president takes the power entrusted to him by the Constitution and delegates it for a specialized purpose to a third party, to a subordinate agency or administration of some sort, or agency, or even individual person. But all of the power, all of the legal authority for all of those subordinate agencies all flow from the president. Now, it's good government policy to classify secret information. It's good government policy to ensure that information is given to the right people and kept away from the wrong people. The power to legally enforce the restriction of that information comes from the president. Congress passes a law that says, hey, this is what needs to happen with documents, and then says, Mr. President, make sure that this law is followed. So we have the Espionage Act and the Presidential Records Act, and probably several more I'm not familiar with. I'm not a lawyer. But we have these laws that are in place that describe how documents should be handled when they're classified and how to declassify them, blah, 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 and all that stuff. In addition to these particular laws, we also have the laws around classification itself. Things that govern, we have laws and regulations that govern where documents can be stored, how they must be stored, how they have to be protected, what kind of network architecture is in place, what kind of physical security is in place before you access these documents, what kind of background checks you're allowed to run, et cetera, et cetera. I'm speaking as someone with an IT background and I formerly held a TS clearance, top secret clearance, for work that I did at another job. I'm somewhat familiar with this space. I'm not a lawyer, but I pay attention. Those laws and regulations and the execution of the legislation provided by the Congress all flow through and from the president. The president holds in himself plenary power to classify and declassify documents and information while he is president of the United States. That means he doesn't have to follow a process. He doesn't have to follow a procedure. He doesn't have to ask someone else permission to declassify things. Otherwise, if you're making the case that that's not true, then if he's negotiating with an adversary, and in the process of that negotiation, he chooses to share a piece of information that is classified, and it comes out that he did that, his subordinates would then have the legal authority to hold him accountable for breaking the law and put him in prison for doing what presidents are supposed to do, i.e. negotiate with foreign powers. That is a reasonable hypothetical. That's nonsense. That's why I say it's a non-starter. Where Trump gets himself in trouble is he likes to talk a lot and he likes to incriminate himself. So I'm separate and aside from random nonsense President Trump may or may not have done. I'm arguing the principle that the president, as president, has complete and unfettered authority to classify documents and declassify documents. Can you go with me that far? Because that's, to me, I don't see a compelling case from anybody that that's not the case. Where we get into Trump drama land and trouble comes from Trump's sloppiness, frankly speaking. As a principle of the thing, let's say I'm president, and let's say I'm going to work for Mar-a-Lago, because I live in Florida, part-time at least. It is completely within my authority to say, I'm going to need these 20 documents or 200 documents or whatever. I'm going to need to work off these documents when I'm down in Florida. We're working on a project. We're working on making a decision, writing up a policy paper, whatever. Stuff presidents do, stuff administrations do. Bring all that stuff down. It's completely within my authority, even without providing a justification as president, to say these documents are no longer classified. Practically speaking, if you declassify them, then realistically, can you reclassify them later? If they've been declassified, then you can share them. Then you can send them out. You can disseminate that information. You've removed the cloak of secrecy around these documents. And then as a practical consideration, you can't be assured that they will remain secret because you made them unsecret. Now it appears President Trump had a practice of declassifying and reclassifying documents in some way. Whatever. Again, his sloppiness causes him and people who try and support him a lot of trouble. The case he's making, the defense that he's making is this. When he took possession of these documents and left with them, as one of the closing acts that he did as president, he declassified these documents. If that's what he did, and really, because of the nature of the position and the law, he's the only one that knows whether he did that or not. If he declassified them, he gets to keep them. They're his. They're not subject to the Espionage Act. They're not subject to sensitive information controls or whatever. They're no longer sensitive because he has the authority as president to declare them declassified. Was that smart? Was that wise? Is that good policy? None of that really enters into the conversation. President Trump is facing criminal charges under the Espionage Act for his handling of these documents. If he's handling classified documents as a private citizen, a former president, there's a problem there. And there may be something that you need to dig around and figure out, okay? Now, we can then, even if that's the case, we can then have the conversation about if you really want us to take this sort of thing seriously and not see it as a political witch hunt, then you need to faithfully execute the laws that control the dissemination of this information, regardless of political party. And if I look and see that there's precedent set where other similar people who have not behaved properly, have not been tried, but you're trying me for all this stuff in a criminal statute, that feels like a political witch hunt. There's like layers and layers of why, to me, this should just go away. I would love for someone to show me what I'm missing. Now, in regards to law and crime in this article, I'm sorry, I got a little derailed. In regards to law and crime in this article, it's very simple. Law and crime is drawing a parallel between someone who is not the president misbehaving with classified documents, being tried and convicted and going to prison for it, and saying that's exactly the same as someone who is or was president at the time misbehaving, for lack of a better term, with classified documents. They're not the same thing. And the fact that they are drawing this parallel is basically making the case that the administrative state, the delegated authority, the people to whom the president's authority was delegated to, the permanent bureaucratic class that sets the rules and the laws and the way these policies are established and disseminated, that they are the final arbiters of who gets to handle documents and when and how, that the national archivist outranks the president. To me, that's the argument that they're making. If they succeed in that argument, it's not overreaching to say that that means that they've established a precedent where the constitutional framework no longer works. There's no longer 3 co-equal branches of government populated by appointed and elected officials, legislative, executive, and judicial. What you're saying then is that all of those constitutional appointments and elected offices are subordinate to the unelected, permanent, no term limit administrative state, that these agencies have outgrown the source of their power and now they are a power unto themselves. When you hear people call for the defunding of the FBI, it's because they see this danger. If the FBI is not accountable to the office that granted it its charter, who are they accountable to? And if you have an intelligence and law enforcement apparatus that is unaccountable to elected officials, you don't have a constitutional republic anymore. That's my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.